All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a sport that actually kicked off with the rather painful medieval practice of smacking balls with bare hands. I know, ouch. But from those wild origins, it has slowly evolved into this massive multi-million dollar global phenomenon. Today, we're talking all about the story of tennis. Over the next few minutes, we'll map out the birth of tennis, the evolution of the racket, Wimbledon traditions and quirks, the open era revolution, and the fight for equality. Basically, we're exploring a 150-year journey through the rules of the game, the crazy tech leaps in equipment, and the ongoing push for true social equality on the court. Starting things off as Section 1, the birth of tennis, going from bare hands to boxed sets. So to really understand where tennis is at today, we've got to rewind to its totally quirky, aristocratic roots in northern France. Look at this timeline. The sport literally leapt from a 12th century hand game called Jeu de Paume, which literally means palm game, and again, ouch, all the way to these fancy private indoor courts built by the French king Louis X in the 14th century. But tennis, the way we recognize it, that didn't officially kick off until 1874. That's when a retired English army officer, Major Walter Clopton Wingfield, snagged a patent for a portable boxed lawn tennis set. He originally tried to call it spherus stick, which is Greek for skill with a ball, but honestly, thank goodness the simpler name lawn tennis was the one that actually stuck. Moving right along to Section 2, the evolution of the racket, transitioning from ash wood to carbon fiber. As Major Wingfield's brilliant little boxed games spread like wildfire across the globe, the equipment, well, it desperately needed to catch up. The material science behind tennis rackets actually went through three massive leaps. For years, rackets were these heavy things crafted from ash wood and literally bound together by animal glue. That was the standard until 1953, when René Lacoste came up with his brilliant loop invention. He used looped wires to string metal frames so the sharp metal edges wouldn't snap the tight strings. Fast forward to step 3, and that metal gives way to the modern era of aerospace-grade composite frames, utilizing super lightweight, practically indestructible carbon fiber and epoxy resins. The real game changer here is that this new tech completely shifted the power dynamics on the court. Suddenly, players could hit harder, swing faster, and generate way more spin. You can see the exact moment this shifted in 1974. That's when Jimmy Connors absolutely dominated the Wimbledon singles title, swinging his iconic, shining Steel Wilson T2000 racket. It was absolute proof that the era of wood was officially over. Okay, up next is Section 3. We're looking at Wimbledon traditions and quirks and the rules of the oldest tournament. Now, while the gear players were using was modernizing at breakneck speed, the world's oldest tennis tournament remained, well, fiercely anchored to its 19th century vibe. Founded by the All England Croquet Club way back in 1877, Wimbledon kicked off with this intense philosophy of survival of the fittest. And honestly, to this day, it remains uniquely rigid. I mean, they enforce outdoor grass courts only and have this notoriously strict all-white dress code. And we're not just talking shirts and shorts. Historically, that applied to undergarments, practice gear, even the on-court medical staff. But hey, at least we still have that wonderful, enduring tradition of serving strawberries and cream to the fans. But all this really raises an incredibly important question. As the sport was modernizing its global reach and dropping space-age tech into its rackets, did its treatment of the players actually keep pace? This is where our explainer takes a really fascinating pivot. Because while the rackets were evolving and Wimbledon was clinging to its quirky rules, the players themselves were quietly brewing a revolution of their own. Which brings us to Section 4, the Open Era Revolution, featuring the original 9 and the Battle of the Sexes. Stepping into the Open Era in 1968, we finally saw a world where professional and amateur players could compete anywhere together. But despite this huge step forward, the financial realities behind the scenes, they were startlingly unbalanced. Just look at the 1968 Wimbledon prize money. The disparity is honestly glaring. The men's winner, Rod Laver, walked away with £2,000, and the women's winner, she got just $750. That massive, undeniable inequality is exactly what pushed Billie Jean King and 8 other players, famously known as the Original 9, to risk their entire careers. They faced suspension, they boycotted tournaments, and ultimately, they successfully formed their own professional circuit, which, as we know, eventually became the WTA. And this entire fight for respect, for fair pay, it all came to a head during the 1973 Battle of the Sexes. So Bobby Riggs, a former champ who had a bad habit of making pretty derogatory comments about women's tennis, publicly challenged Billie Jean King to an exhibition match. And guess what? She crushed him in straight sets. It was incredible. But it wasn't just a tennis match, right? Watched by 90 million people worldwide, this became a massive, undeniable cultural moment for women's sports and the broader emancipation movement.
All right, let's head into our final part, Section 5, the fight for equality and closing the wage gap.
What's super interesting is how that raw 1970s activism evolved into modern demands for true data-backed parity. Real change usually requires a strong, unflinching voice, right? Well, five-time Wimbledon champion Venus Williams brought exactly that in a powerful 2006 op-ed for The Times. By bluntly stating that Wimbledon is putting itself on the wrong side of history, she put an immense amount of direct, very public pressure on those famously traditional tournament organizers. It was huge. She caught the attention of everyone from the general public all the way up to the UK Prime Minister. And thankfully, decades of groundwork paired with Venus's direct pressure, it finally paid off. Check out this chart. Following a long, really hard climb that started back in 1968, Wimbledon finally equalized prize money across all rounds in 2007. It was an absolutely objective, historic milestone in Grand Slam history. However, if we step outside the bubble of those four major Grand Slams, looking at tournaments like Rome, the data tells a very different story. You can see this sharply diverging trend line between the men's and women's prize pools, leading all the way up to the pandemic. It just goes to show that the fight for parity was and is far from over. Let's actually put that chart's disparity into real-world perspective for a second. In 2022, despite playing at the exact same venue, at the exact same time, women's champion Iga Swiatek earned €520,000. That is literally less than half of the 1.1 million euros that men's champion Novak Djokovic took home. Less than half. So what's causing this? Well, the structural root of the issue is tied directly to how tournaments are tiered. Because women's tournaments are sometimes categorized at a lower ranking level, which awards fewer points, the prize pools just mathematically shrink in comparison to the men's equivalents. It's built right into the system. Let the numbers speak for themselves here. When we analyzed the top 100 earners back in 2017, this financial gap clearly persists across every single tier of the professional ranking. Whether you're looking at the top 10, the top 50, or the top 100, the aggregate earnings reveal a stark structural divide. Visually, if you put all that 2017 data together, it breaks down to a 61% to 39% split in favor of the men. This really highlights a complex reality for us. While tennis is widely celebrated as being at the absolute forefront of sports equality, especially when you compare it to sports like football or basketball, a definitive, highly quantifiable gap still exists. And it's not just about the prize money, Players today still have to navigate some serious ongoing hurdles. Take the lower tier events, for example. For players trying to break into the top rankings in 2023, there were 137 men's challenger events, but only 17 equivalent events for women. That heavily limits their earning opportunities. Then you've got unequal media scrutiny and these deeply entrenched clothing regulations. Remember in 2018 when Alice Cornet got an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty just for briefly changing a backwards shirt on the court? Male players do that freely all the time. So as we celebrate 150 years of this truly amazing sport, looking all the way back from that painful medieval palm game to the modern era of aerospace carbon fiber, it leaves us with one pretty provocative thought. The physical game of tennis has undoubtedly been revolutionized, but as it evolves into its next century, will the social evolution of the sport ultimately cross the finish line alongside its incredible technological ones? It's a massive question, and it's one the tennis world is actively answering, match by match. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.